Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidil anbiya wa mursaleen, nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. What's going on here? It's a lot of information, I know, but you guys should be familiar with it. What is this discussing? What are these 4 points regarding?
The 5th point.
Okay, the 5th condition. The 5th condition for a hadith to be sound. And what was that 5th condition?
Loan reports.
Loan reports, ahsant. And in Arabic, is called? You guys know?
Ahad.
Shadh. Ahad is a larger, broader category of hadith that are like our singular reports. But shadh, what is unique about it is like not only is it a lone report, but it's a report that actually goes against other narrators and opposes them. And we said that these 4 things are used to what? These 4 conditions. Where do I use them and why do I use them?
To grade the authenticity.
To grade the authenticity of a hadith when what? Something is absent.
One of the 3 conditions? No.
If one of those conditions is absent, what do I rule on the hadith? If a hadith doesn't have a it doesn't have a trustworthy narrator, if it's not, the chain isn't connected, or if he's not precise, the hadith is going to be rejected, right? It's already going to be considered weak in some way, shape, or form. Is this what's going on here?
This is for the loan reports.
These are for loan reports, right? And we said the 4th condition is when we have what? So the 4th condition is when. So over here we talked about the 3. You guys remember them? What is the 4th condition?
Was it connected? No, it was hidden defects.
Hidden defects. And hidden defects, where do they become apparent?
When you cross-reference.
When you're able to cross-reference and when you have multiple reports. So the problem we said here in this last category is what? What happened here? That I start needing additional reasoning. Because I have nothing to compare it to. Like, so when I have the shadh report, when I have this loan report, I have nothing there to compare it to. So because I have nothing to compare it to, I now have to look for other qara'in. I have to look for other supporting evidences in order to help me actually grade that hadith. So we said over here, number 1, umum al-balwa, right? Isn't an issue that is important and many Muslims would face. Why is that an important reason for a hadith to be narrated or for a loan report to come about? So, for example, the obligation of zakat. The obligation of zakat. Would you imagine that such an issue you would have a few reports or you'd have many?
Many.
Right? You'd imagine you have many reports concerning that. Why? Huh? Okay, well there are a lot of things that are fiqh related, but you don't have like a lot of information on it. Let me just give one example. When an individual accidentally kills someone else, like there's a car accident or something happens, what is supposed to happen at that point? You have to pay diya, you have to pay a blood money. Who pays the blood money, firstly?
The killer.
The aqila, right? The family of the person who's accused, right? He has to do it. How much time does he have to pay?
It's determined
by what?
by the family of the killer.
Okay, well, if the family of the killer, they're going to tell you to pay when?
No, the guy.
They're going to pay. Yeah. No, I'm saying his family. They're going to tell they said, okay, you guys have to pay us when?
They're going to give.
You have to pay us right now. But do you imagine that there can be a time period for that?
I guess.
Right? There can be. The only supporting evidence we have concerning this is a weak hadith that says that you have to pay off 1/3 of the diya in a year, meaning that how much time do you have to pay? Maximum. You have 3 years to pay it off.
3 years?
3 years. Right. So this is a fiqh issue, yes? But we don't have a lot of reports concerning it. So it's not necessarily just a fiqh issue. What else do you think is important? Even greater than that. I mean, you touched on it, but expand on that a little bit. It's a fundamental issue, right? This is something that it's something that every single Muslim is what? Responsible and obligated to do. The same thing. Do you imagine a few reports on prayer or a lot of reports? You would imagine a lot of reports on prayer. Right, or things that have to do with punishments, right? You'd imagine a lot of reports on these things. But the Prophet ﷺ, the number of times that he traveled to or he went to a particular wife's house. Do we have a lot of narrations on those? No. Why?
Because he usually doesn't go.
Is it important that we know the Prophet ﷺ visited Maymuna in his lifetime 72 times? Does it benefit us anything? No, not really. And I doubt you had a Sahabi sitting there counting the number of times, that he actually went. Right? Or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like we would have descriptions of his clothing, but would we have a daily account of what he wore? No, right? And why is that? Because it's not something that most Muslims found to be what? Important, right? It was an issue that they faced. Meaning that just imagine after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you now have an entire generation of Muslims, because after his death, immediately you had a war, right? So Abu Bakr didn't really have time to expand the empire. But during the time of Umar, what happened? Where there was a huge expansion, right? You're talking about like a massive expansion of the Muslim empire. All of these people that are coming into Islam, what do they need? I'm sorry? Everybody's like kind of whispering, scared to answer, right? Huh? What were you going to say, Samira? Right, they're going to need to know the fundamentals of the deen. So where are they going to go? Right, they're going to go to the students of the Prophet ﷺ. They're going to go to the companions, they're going to ask them, and the companions, how are they going to answer? They're based on prophetic guidance. They're going to say, well, the Prophet ﷺ, he told us to do this. He told us to pray like this. He told us to fast like this. He told us this is the type of food that we can eat. He told us that this is the way to slaughter. Why? Because these are things that people face every single day. And another example of this, that, like for example, you have a modern day scholar who says that women wearing circular pieces of gold is not permissible. Is not permissible. So if you have a circular piece of gold, it is not permissible to wear. What do you guys think about that based on this issue? We're probably going to be spending most of our time on this. The second one, precision. Is the narrator precise to the point where we can trust his individual narrations? That's something that's important, right? So even if you have a narrator with a lone narration, but you know this person, he doesn't really have a lot of mistakes. He's really precise when he narrates. Does that give me more trust in accepting his lone narrations? Absolutely. The tabaqa. So over here, is it possible that you only have one or two companions that heard something from the Prophet ﷺ on a particular subject?
Yes.
Right? The chances are pretty high of that. The second generation, are the chances just as high? Just as high, think about it.
No.
That the companion is teaching something, and this is the only student to learn it?
No.
Are you following what I'm saying? So, is there a chance?
Yeah.
Yes. Is the chance as high as during the time of the companions?
Oh,
no. That they're students. And what happens in the next generation? The chances are going to be? Decrease. Right, so every level you move down the chain, the chances of this individual lone report surviving, they what? They decrease and they diminish. And the last one, the students. So if you have a sheikh, he has a number of students. And not just that, the sheikh himself, does he have an unlimited number of narrations?
No.
Right, it's mahdud, right? There's a limitation to the narrations that he actually has. So if you have the sheikh with this limited number of narrations, and you have all of these students that sit with him, and if I hear 10, 15 of his students, and these students have been with him for a number of years, all of a sudden there's this lone narrator that comes, that sits with him for 3 years, and now he has additional narrations that none of the other students narrate. Is it a good idea to trust him?
No.
Probably not. Probably not. But the opposite can happen. You have students who sit with him for 2 or 3 years, and there's a group of a hadith that they narrate, but you have one who's been sitting with him for 10. Is there a chance that there are some lone reports exist with him?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All of these are very important tools for us to help figure out, because what are we trying to remove, right? After the first stage, or the first criteria for a Sahih Hadith, what were we trying to remove? Lying.
Yeah.
Lying, right? That's the first thing. Now, when we talk about precision, when we talk about a connected chain, when we talk about comparative reports, and now that we talk about lone reports, what are we trying to diminish? The mistakes. Right? Because we've already established through the first criteria that this individual is not a what? Liar. So even if he says something on purpose and he believes it and it's wrong, this is what? This is a mistake. This is a mistake. So now that we don't have these comparative reports, we're going to use these other external factors to help us judge the hadith. So the first 3 criteria, they actually help us judge the hadith itself, right? Those first 3, they help me define and determine if this hadith is sahih or not. These last 2, the comparative reports and the lone reports, this is where I need to look where? I need to look in other places. I need to look outside of them, right? So in comparative reports, I can no longer rely on this report. I have to look where? I have to look outside of it. And when it comes to these loan reports, also all of these things, I have to look where? I have to look in other sources and I have to look in other places. Because, like for example, and we'll talk about some examples, inshallah. So an issue that is prevalent and repeatedly faced, this would cause a response from narrators to bring something relevant. Again, this is the companions. They're facing something, they're being asked about something, and as a response, they're going to narrate something in order to help bring clarification. So due to the prevalence of this issue, whatever this issue might be, the chances of finding a lone unique report, like for example, if you have someone who says, talking about the 5 daily prayers, they said, this is the time for the prayer, this is the time for the prayer, this is the time for the prayer, and he's like, and the 6th prayer starts at this time. Right? Can you imagine that there's a mistake in the prayers? That somebody missed a 6th prayer? Is that something that's even conceivable? No, absolutely not. And why? Because it's something that everybody faces. So where is this especially prevalent? In halal and haram. Like you said, right? It has fiqh issues. Why? So this idea of things that people face, why is it so much more prevalent in issues of halal and haram?
You're saying like halal is like a reward for and it's haram.
Okay, it's because it's connected to reward and punishment. Absolutely. What else?
They run into whatever they
I'm sorry? Well, so there are everyday things that are not necessarily related to those, right? You know, so there are certain virtues and fala'il that we can do, but that aren't necessarily related to, you know, punishments and rewards, and to the same level. Historical accounts, for example. You know what I mean? Like you have other things. But the thing with the halal and haram is like you said, it's like these are things that an individual can be punished for or be rewarded. So they took extra care with these types of narrations. So less so in virtues. So like, you know, general virtues. I don't know how you guys are familiar with different narrations that talk about the virtue of specific surahs. The vast majority of them are weak. Vast majority of them. But you still have scholars who narrate them and utilize them. Encouragement, targhib wa tarhib. Like for example, involving yourself in riba is worse than marrying your mother. Have you guys heard this hadith? Yeah. It's weak, right? It's a weak hadith. But why do the scholars use it? Because they really want you to what? They want you to scare you, and they want you to stay away from riba. Or this other hadith, a very famous, about the one who stays in the masjid until sunrise, right? He prays Salatul Fajr. He prays into the masjid until sunrise, and he prays 2 rak'ah. He gets the reward for what? Fajr, Humrah, tam, complete. This hadith is also weak, but it is a what? An encouragement. So this is why scholars utilize them. Historical accounts. Sometimes you'll only have 1 or 2 narrations that talk about, well, this person went here and he met here. And sometimes they're very detailed reports. Like you're talking about pages and pages and pages and pages of one narrator like narrating this really big long story. Why? Because he was probably there from the beginning to the end. And narrators, like we said, they spent most of their time and efforts in what? What type of narrations? I mean, of course from the Prophet. Halal and haram. Right? This was their major focus. This was their major focus. So now you have all of these individual string hadith, right? They didn't spend a lot of time in that, and that's why, because they weren't as popular, you have less what? You have less chains. Battles. So like, yes, Nama. Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. Listen, Allah is generous. May Allah reward them. Yeah. Okay. This is a question, and I don't mind dealing with it now. But basically, where am I allowed to use a weak hadith? Right. This is the better question. Where am I allowed to use a weak hadith? If there is something that is Allahu Akbar. If there is something that is if there's something that is already established. Like, so for example, praying Fajr and Jama'ah. Is there any difference of opinion over the reward? No, there's not. Like staying in the masjid, just in general. Is there any difference of opinion that there's no reward? No, there's reward in that. Praying 2 rak'ah, just nafilah. Is there reward in it? Yes, absolutely. So all of these things are mashru'. All of these things are already legislated. Now to combine them and to say that this... تفضل يا أخي.
Just so you can keep the shuja'ah.
Yeah.
There's some that say it's hasan because of the...
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that another time, man. Like the... Yeah. No, but I'm saying, and we'll talk. We'll talk about how they were used too. Yeah, we'll talk about why they're used too, because I'll bring you three narrations. I'll bring you one from Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, I'll bring you one from Imam Ahmed, and I'll bring you one from Ibn Abi Hatim. I'm talking about how they utilize weak hadith and how do we understand it. Like, is it bad? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and this is a very valid question. Is it bad that we have such a hadith? And is it bad that people will act on it? Absolutely, I don't think so. I don't think so. And why is that? Like, you have these three, and may Allah guide me. So like you, so if you have all of these things and they are falling under something that is already legislated, why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? The problem comes in when someone brings a hadith and says the one who fasts on Tuesday will get an extra reward. Why is that hadith a problem? Right? Because now you're going against things that are already established. You're creating a virtue that didn't exist. Versus taking these different virtues and maybe putting them under one larger umbrella. And this is why you have many scholars, they'll narrate these hadith about specific virtues of particular surahs. Why? Is there a virtue in the Quran? Is there virtue in its recitation? Yeah. Now, what that specific virtue is, this is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. But is it possible that a person gains that reward by reading this particular surah? It's possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the one who distributes the good deeds. It's up to him on how much he wants to give and whoever he wants to give. Yes?
How many percentage of from all the hadith is weak than the...
Like in the entire hadith encyclopedia?
In general. More weak?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, so, I don't know, akhi. It's difficult for me to say. I would say that there are more weak than there are sound, yes.
So above 50%.
Maybe probably even less, man. But you know, so saying that, do we have books that collect the sound narrations? Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, so here let me give you like a general guideline. If it's from the 6 books, right? If one of the 6 books minus Ibn Majah is a little bit. I'll say from the other 5. And the only reason I say that is because of the reason he wrote his book. Remember, there are a few theses that were written on Sunan Ibn Majah, and they actually went back to figure out what the title of the book was. And I believe that what the correct title is, based on their research, was the Sunan al-Gharaib. Yeah. So like he mentioned some sunan, which he did, and some gharaib, which are some strange, unique reports. And this is why you find many weak hadith in Ibn Majah. And he did this purposely. It was by design. It wasn't because he was a weak scholar of hadith. He knew exactly what he was doing. He actually has a book of tafsir that has been lost, but it probably has some of the most authentic narrations concerning tafsir of the ayat. Yes?
So you're saying it's about the weak hadith as long as it doesn't go against what's already established.
Yeah.
Sound hadith,
absolutely.
Then we're good, and if it adds on to it,
Yeah. So that's where it becomes a problem. Like, is it falling under something that's already mashru'? Is it falling under something that has already been legislated? At that point, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. Yes?
Should you be obligated to point out a weak hadith if you reference one?
It depends on what the hadith is. And not just that. You have to understand, a hadith, when it comes to grading hadith, it can also be subjective sometimes. Meaning that there are certain scholars who deem it weak, and other scholars who see it to be. Like, for example, the hadith of,
Like this hadith you just said, say it's hasan.
Yeah. So some hadith, like some scholars will say it's hasan. They'll say, and it's acceptable, and you can use it. And they'll have, and that's more of a discussion of how do you actually make a hadith hasan. It's a valid question, right? Like, how do I take a hadith, and how do I decide if it's acceptable or not? And we said that these are the conditions that are there, but are there sometimes supporting condition and supporting evidences that we can see and seek? Right? Well, man, this is actually pretty representative of the verse, right? Even though it's like, okay, well, you know, Sayyid al-Hifz, Kathir al-Ghalat, you know what I mean? Like he has a weak memory, and then the next narrator, you know, he makes a lot of mistakes. Like you have all of these things that are definitely there. But is it enough for me? Okay, but the meaning here, man, it's very much in line with all of the other ahadith. It's very much in line with ayat. And it sounds very prophetic. Like, is that reason enough to give it some value? Yes, I believe so.
So should you still be obligated to say that the ulama disagreed on whether it's
They can't, and they will disagree. They will disagree.
So when you
Yeah.
reference it to somebody
Yeah.
to al-Awni,
Yeah.
should you tell them that, like, by the way, this is,
Well, I mean, you can say that such and such scholar said it was weak, but what if he responds and say, okay, well, such and such scholar said it was Hasan? You understand? Like, unless it's something that is fabricated, where you're going to have a general agreement on when things are fabricated.
that's perjury.
Yeah. Because it's absolute perjury against the Prophet ﷺ. Versus weakness, man, like you have levels of weakness. The two that absolutely need to be avoided are extremely weak and fabricated. Extremely weak hadith are narrated by liars, but the meaning might be correct. Like, for example, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, right? And actions are by intentions. If you have somebody who's a liar narrating this hadith, the text is still what? It's still sahih, even though he narrated it, but this chain is what? This chain, not just weak, extremely weak. Why? Because the person is a liar. So that's an example of that. Any questions? Or did I confuse you guys more? Sorry. Along these lines. So along these lines, there's a large category of things like outside of halal and haram that you would find some of these things in. And I'll mention here 3 examples. So Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, he said, whenever we narrated on the Prophet ﷺ concerning permissible and impermissible rulings, we would be very critical of the chains of narrations, nitpicking concerning the narrators. It's very clear. He says, if we narrated concerning virtuous actions, rewards, punishments, permissible things, and supplications, we would be more lenient with the chains of narrations. Imam Ahmed, he said that hadith that soften the heart are deserving of being more lenient with until there is a ruling in it. Again, something that is related to halal and haram. Ibn Abi Hatim, he said concerning the levels of the narrators, from them are the truthful, righteous, forgetful ones. So he's already established what? That this person is what? From the conditions? He's trustworthy. He's not going to what? He's not going to lie. But he might what? He might forget or he might make a mistake. Most of their narrations are delusions, mistaken, forgetfulness, or even major mistakes. Concerning them, you can record their hadith regarding what? Encouragements, exhortations, abstinence, zuhud, manners, adab. But he is not to be relied upon concerning halal and haram. Yes?
I also heard that maybe the fifth aqeedah is also second where you are careful with.
Yeah, so there are 2 additional categories that I've heard from different mashayikh. I need to find a mustanad. I need to find somebody saying it other than modern day scholars. Does that make sense? It's not necessary that they're wrong in what they're saying, but I haven't been able to find a classical statement from a scholar. Yeah, like because the precedent here is very clear when they talk about halal and haram. But the precedent for aqidah, because you have some hadith that'll talk about ghaybiyat. It'll talk about unseen things. And you could tell like, okay, there's some weakness in the chain, but the scholars don't say anything. So like I said, I'm not doubting that that's correct, because that we take our, obviously believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believing in the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, believing in the angels, these are all fundamental parts of the religion. But like descriptions of certain angels, you know what I mean? Like, so you have some of those things that might be, when you talk about foundational things, I can agree, but like when it comes to like some of these far'i things, it's a little bit more challenging. Yeah. So the halal and haram for sure. The 2 other ones, aqidah, which I've heard before. The other one is asani, the jarh wa ta'dil. I don't know if jarh wa ta'dil. So basically, when it comes to, not only do you have a difference of opinion concerning on how to grade a hadith, but you also have a difference of opinion concerning who? Narrators, right? So concerning an individual narrator, so for those of you that attended the seminar this past weekend, Shaykh Ahmed Mutawi, his PhD thesis was actually on al-muqtaraḥ, like those narrators who got confused at some point in their life, right? Something happened. Some of them, they lost a child. Some of them, their house burned down. Some of them, they got into accidents. So these individuals, there was a time where their narrations were what?
They're making rash decisions, yeah?
No. There was a time that they were making, that their narrations were? Truthful. They're truthful and acceptable. Everybody took from them. But then an event happened. Something happened. And there was some kind of trauma that happened. And after that, they were unable to what? They weren't able to be consistent in their narrations. So he said that concerning even these narrators, you'll find that when they made those mistakes, it wasn't enough to actually be a lie on the Prophet ﷺ. He said, and he was just saying like, and again, this is just one narrator he spent time on. He was like, this guy narrated 600 narrations. He had 600 narrations. He said, even in those 600 narrations, you don't find anything fabricated. Like it never got that bad. And I just you know, I really thought it was interesting. But saying that, the asanid al-jarh wa ta'dil, I think that only plays a role when I have a difference of opinion concerning a narrator. Does that make sense? Because that's the only time I'm actually going to need to check it, to make sure that this is actually an ascribable statement back to the imam. Because who are some of the imams who would speak about narrators? We have some right here. Like this is one of the biggest one. Him and his father, Ibn Abi Hatim and Abu Hatim al-Razi. These guys would speak about narrators. He would speak about narrators. He used to speak Naqd, Yahya ibn Ayn, Naqd, right? These are all major critics of hadith, and sometimes they say things about different narrators. We have to make sure that we can actually ascribe it, not understand. We can ascribe it to them. Understanding is another layer, right? Because sometimes they would say things, and you're like, is he weak or not? You know. But we'll mention some examples, inshallah. But is it ascribable to these individuals or not? I don't know of anyone who's gone through the books of Jarh wa Ta'dil and checked every single isnad. I don't know that to even be a norm. I don't know that to be something that's realistic. But it makes sense when I have a difference of opinion concerning a narrator. Then I can go back and that can actually give me a criteria to say that this narrator is thiqa, or I can say that he is saduq or weak or whatever the case might be. So these are the other two additional categories, but again, this is more from, I've seen this more from mu'asirin, I've seen this more from present day scholars than something that's historically reported like to this extent. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong, I would be more comfortable if I found someone classical saying it. So what does being lenient entail? Which is a good question. When they say that they're being lenient, at-tasahul, what does that actually mean?
They're not being serious, they're not complying with the rules.
They're not being serious? Man, you just threw the whole science out the window.
No, like let's say a cop seems to be like speeding 120 miles, and then he's like,
but there's no punishment related to the afterlife. That's just in this world. But over here, so is it possible that the scholars of hadith would ascribe something to the Prophet ﷺ that he didn't say? Would that make sense based off all the conditions that we've been going through so far? No, right? That doesn't sound right. So this leaves us with a couple possibilities on what it is that they actually meant, based on how they used those hadith themselves and based on the statements that we just shared. One, that is unascribable, that you can't actually ascribe it to the Prophet ﷺ, or it is ascribable, but in what way and why? These are the only two possibilities. Can you guys think of a third? Either you attribute it to the Prophet ﷺ or you say he didn't say it. It's always a probability, right? So when we talk about this, we even said last class that was the goal of the Muḥaddithīn to have 100% accuracy that is to the Prophet ﷺ? No, it's not. It was what? It was a calculated risk, right? Their idea was to minimize and diminish the number of, or the possibility of, making a mistake. So when we talk about unascribable or ascribable, this is something that's important for us to keep in mind, because there's no third option, right? These are the only two that are there. So let's talk about it. When we say it's unascribable, we're saying that they narrated hadith and they say that it's permissible to what? So they're still narrating these hadiths, and we're saying that the Prophet ﷺ didn't say it. Why would anybody narrate it then? It does make sense. We just need to understand the reason. Then they would have put it in their collection of fabricated narrations, or in their collection of weak narrations.
So because there is some kind of possibility, then...
Think about it. If I'm telling you something, but I don't want to ascribe it to the Prophet ﷺ, why am I telling you?
Because there's a possibility.
It can be an awareness, or what?
There's some virtue in it.
There's a benefit, right? There has to be a benefit in it. And the benefit that's there is something that is tangible, right? It's a good benefit that you can take from this, and it's something that you can actually learn from. And if it's something that you can learn and something that you can benefit from, for them it was what? Worth? It was worth passing on, it was worth narrating. طيب, Israeliyat. What are Israeliyat? Israelis? Allahu Akbar. So, is it permissible to narrate on Israelis? So, we talking about your cousin, Zach? Yeah.
Traditions found outside of Islam, specifically
Sure.
in Jewish and
Christian.
sources.
Okay, so absolutely, right? So these are Jewish and Christian sources that are found outside of Islam. Concerning these narrations, some of them are they're very broken chains. You don't have any idea who's in the chain of narration. But what did the Prophet ﷺ say about Israeliyat? What did he say about these narrations from the people of the book?
Don't believe, don't reject.
He said, "La tusaddiqu, la tukaddibu." He said, don't say that they are true, but also don't say that they're false. So they're saying that if we as Muslims can take these narrations, what about those that actually have benefit in them? Because Israeliyat, most of the ones that you kind of take with a grain of salt, they'll tell you things like the color of the dog of the people of the cave. You know what I mean? Like, is it really beneficial information? Or the number of people at a particular battle, right? Or all the lineage of an individual, you know what I mean? Like who has nothing to do with prophethood.
That makes no sense.
I mean, it's not about not making sense. Is the information useful? No, right? It's not really useful information. It's extraneous information.
Then why did they mention?
Huh?
Why did they mention?
Because it's a way of recording history. Like these are historical accounts.
Okay, but
and the
there are other
Prophet.
things that could be historical accounts that could be useful.
Mm.
You just said it's not useful information, just for historical accounts.
Yeah, just for historical purposes. I'm saying like here, news. How do you decide what to put in the news and what to take out?
What sounds right and
To who?
what does not sound wrong.
By views, maybe?
Like what
Okay,
sounds-
how do you decide that?
What's more controversial to people?
How do you decide that?
Measuring
It's going to be measure it by you, right? It's going to be subjective. What I think is important information as
Any bias.
as a historian, it's always going to be biased. But we're not talking about bias, right? We're talking about recording. So here, when I'm talking about recording history, who decides what gets to be recorded?
the winner?
The historian, right? The historian himself.
Is it the winner?
I'm not going to be,
The winner?
Sometimes the losers record too. So you have to understand, like here, when we have historians recording things, they're deciding what was important and what wasn't. But me as a loyal historian, what should I do when I have this information? Do I exclude it? No. I include everything. Exactly. I include everything. Because written history, do you guys not know how old written history is?
5,000?
Yeah, it's like 4,000 or 5,000 years old. It's not that old. It's really not that old. So when these people would inherit these writings, what do you think they did with them?
Adjust them?
They tried to record them as much as possible because they're trying to preserve history. Why that's important, we'll talk about another time. The problem with this is that even Israeliyat, we don't ascribe it to revelation. Right? They're just reports that we have. We don't say that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they say that no, this is actually a false analogy and that this can't work. But the response is like, okay, but there's still a lesson in there. There's still a reminder that's in there. And that lesson and reminder is not going against what? It's not going against the principles of the Sharia. And because it's not going, not only is it not going against, it's actually what? It's aiding it. It's falling within the principles of the Sharia. So this is something that should be used as a reminder and as a lesson. But in summary, it is permissible to benefit from them, but not what? Ascribe them to the Prophet ﷺ. And you will find later day scholars, how did they get around this? And I mean, this is a bit of a funny question. It's a bit of like, for those who are like slightly, who enjoy hadith.
So they would say, for example, like, this is maybe weak narration, but the meaning is sound.
They won't even do that. They'll just say ruya, or qila, or ruya. They'll say it has been narrated. It has been said. And I, as a reader, what can I, immediately a red flag should go off and I know what?
Anecdote?
No, that's ascribable.
Right, that this is not ascribable to the Prophet ﷺ. But I can still benefit from it. So the idea is, what is the goal? The goal is to push individuals to do good deeds, and good deeds that are already what? They're already legislated, they're already established, but we just want to encourage people to do them by utilizing these weak narrations, because the chance that the Prophet ﷺ said it is what? It's like little to none, right? It's like little to none, but there's still what? There's still a small possibility. And this is what Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi and Imam Ahmed seem to be alluding to in their statements. So when they said, and they spoke about what they said about like where we do tasahul, this, wallahu alam, seems to be what they had meant. That they were saying that you benefit from it, but you don't ascribe it to the Prophet ﷺ. So here, when we say that you ascribe it, they say they narrate the hadith, benefit, and they ascribe it to the Prophet ﷺ. And that such issue, basically the call is, or the claim is that these issues don't require the same amount of strictness. They don't acquire the same amount of rigidity. Why?
Ascribable or unscribable?
Ascribable.
Because they don't have to do it for that, no?
I'm sorry? Because it doesn't have to do with halal and haram, right? There's no reward or punishment that's related to these. It's not the stakes are not as high, and because the stakes are lesser, the rigidity and the strictness don't have to be as high. Those standards are actually lower. Not just that. What category are we talking about overall in hadith? Huh? Yeah, we're talking about loan reports now. I don't even have anything to compare it to. You understand? So when we're talking about these loan reports, like, do I have to be astringent concerning them? So these rulings that deal with Allah's pleasure and anger, they require more stringency, right? Because this is, now you're not only ascribing to the Prophet ﷺ, but you're also ascribing it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as long as the narrator is not problematic concerning his adala, concerning his trustworthiness, the individual reports concerning these issues, again, are not as big a deal. It's not as big an issue. Because the chances of such a narrator to be completely mistaken is also less than somebody who is less trustworthy. Meaning that the scholars of hadith would prefer somebody who is what? Trustworthy, right? That's one of the golden standards, right? That this individual be trustworthy. He should also be dhabit, right? He should also be precise. But is there leniency in the precision? Yeah, there has to be. Why? Because we all make mistakes. And this is what Ibn Abi Hatim seems to be alluding to in his statement. So we had three scholars, and the way that we can understand what it is what they said is that there is a spectrum on how we deal with these weak hadith. But both of them, they agree on what? That these hadith can be what? They can be benefited from. Should I build rulings based off of them? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So one clear criteria of judgment concerning ruling on a hadith is that the topic, type, and meaning of the hadith is used as a gauge to determine the possibility of this individual report being usable. Does that make sense? Or no?
Textual knowledge, right?
Yeah. So now, because the thing is, remember, we just have this individual chain. And we're already at a point, we've gone through all 4 stages, and we're at this 5th stage now, meaning that I've done what? At least. By looking at this chain, I can determine it's what? It's authentic, right? I'm superficially looking at it, and superficially it looks to me that it is authentic. All right, so what do I do? The next stage is like, okay, let me compare reports. I don't have anything to compare it to. So now what do I do? Now I have to look at the text. I look at the matan. Looking at what is actually being said, and over here I can say, okay, let me look in the chapter that this hadith would be under, and then I can do what? It's not corroborating chains anymore, it's corroborating what?
The way it was said.
The way it was said, the content itself, right? Is there anything that is said in a similar way about the same, within the same subject?
So you're looking for similarities.
Yeah, because you're still looking for those similarities. And where can you look for it? You can look for it in the topic, the type of thing that's being discussed. Is it in the same setting that the Prophet ﷺ was in? Like maybe it was something that's parallel, right? So all of these can be used as extra information to help us determine on the authenticity of this individual or of this loan report. Ibn Abi Hatim, he narrates, I heard my father mention a hadith of Abdullah ibn Dinar on the authority of Ibn Umar that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ forbade from selling or gifting clientage. You guys know what clientage is? It has to do with slaves. So in slavery, there's this concept called wala. Wala is that if a master frees his slave, the slave does what? He does what now? He takes my name. Right? He takes my family name. So one of the ways to pass nasab, lineage. One of the ways to pass lineage is from master to slave, meaning that the slave is now from the people who is eligible to receive some zakat. Everybody, like anybody who's poor, inheritance. And I don't want to take too much of a sidetrack, but we have a little bit of time. One of the interesting things, like for those of you that might have attended Jonathan A.C. Brown's lecture on slavery, he was talking about how come slavery wasn't prohibited in Muslim countries like it was in Western countries. And as he was talking, he mentioned some things. I realized that one of the main reasons is that slavery didn't prevent social mobility. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's one example. Not to say slaves have this like wonderful life in Islam, but it didn't prevent social mobility. Meaning that many times the owner, he would actually send his slave to do business on his behalf. Many times people would sell their children into slavery because they would be part of the king's guard. And not just that, if a woman became pregnant from her master, what would happen to the children? They would be free, and they would be ascribed to the father, and the mother is no longer allowed to be sold. She can no longer be sold, and at his death she is freed. So all of these things, why was there not a huge push for abolition? Because the same lack of social mobility that happened in chattel Western slavery was not happening in the Muslim world. And when you have the ability to move socially within a confine, you feel less of a need to break out of it.
So it's a comfortable.
Yeah. It was comfortable. Again, not comfortable for everyone, but was there an element of comfort that was there? Yes.
But it was a convenience.
For some it was. Like you even have I think it was Tawus. He was angry that his master freed him, and he was a great hadith scholar.
What?
Yeah. You know why? He said that when I was a slave, my reward was double, and he said now that you freed me, my reward is going to be half.
What do you mean by reward? Becomes half when you get freed.
Meaning that you receive double the reward when you're a slave for doing good deeds.
Oh.
Yeah. Tfadal.
Half the effort.
Yeah.
In addition to all of that, encouragement and reward for.
No, for freeing slaves. Yeah, like so. Absolutely. So I mean, I don't know where he got his statistics from, but he said basically in whatever Islamic recorded history we have, if you just look at it as a whole, the average amount of time that a person was a slave was 7 years. Like this was the average. Most people didn't stay a slave for very long in Islamic empires. So, not to say that there weren't atrocities and things that were committed, but again, I just want to give a little bit of perspective, and I just wanted to share concerning this is not something you would ever find in Western chattel slavery. That this individual now, if a slave master didn't have any children, and the only surviving person was a slave, who would get his estate? The slave would. This is how it worked. So he forbade from selling or gifting clientage, meaning that if I'm a freed slave, I can't sell my name to someone else. I can't even gift it to someone else. This is how important this concept of wala is, right? Because inheritance only happens in 3 ways. Do you guys know what those ways are? Lineage, of course.
Bequest up to
That's not inheritance. Bequest you can give to anyone. Marriage, ahsant. And the third? Slaves. These are the only 3 ways. Slavery. So Shu'bah, he made Abdullah ibn Dinar swear that he heard it from Ibn Umar, so he did. He went. Thank you. So Shu'bah, he went to Abdullah ibn Dinar and he said to Abdullah ibn Dinar, swear by Allah that you heard this hadith from Ibn Umar. And Abdullah ibn Dinar, he said, I swear by Allah that I heard this hadith from Ibn Umar. So my father, Abu Hatim, he said, Shu'bah had great insight into hadith and understanding of it. He made him swear because Shu'bah denied this hadith. He rejected this hadith. You guys know where this hadith is? Hadith in Sahih Muslim. A ruling from the Prophet ﷺ that no one else narrates. It is singularly narrated from Abdullah on Ibn Umar, and this is why he had doubt in it. This is why he had doubt in it. Some scholars feel that Shu'bah had a problem with this particular chain, not necessarily the hadith in and of itself. Yeah, so this is just one example that Shu'bah, he saw this as an individual report. So what did he want to do? He wanted to verify. So what did he do? He went to the narrator and he asked him. Now, subhanAllah, this is one of the things we just don't have access to today, right? If I doubt a hadith, and Shu'bah, he's doubting this hadith, so what does he do? He's like, man, I'm just going to go ask the narrator himself. Like, did you hear this? He's like, yeah, I heard it, man. Like, I heard it from him directly. He says, oh, say wallah. And he's like, wallahi, I heard it from him. He's like, okay, no problem. And why did he doubt it? Because it was a singular report. We don't have these means available to us today. And this is why you have Ibn Salah, he says that it is not possible to make a hukm on a hadith. Why? Because the chains, the tools, the methods, they're all lost. The only thing that we can do is make a hukm on the asanid. Yeah, I'm sorry.
You said this after the slaves were freed, they had social mobility. Did they have economic
No.
mobility?
I'm saying during slavery, they had social and economic mobility.
Oh, what about after?
Yeah. Afterward, even more so. Because they're free. They're free, khalas. So, and not just that.
In any way?
Wallahu alam, I don't like, I'm sure that there were people who were, racist against slaves. Saying that, there are no written laws that you find that ex-slaves can't do this or ex-slaves can't do that. And not just that, another big difference between chattel and Islamic slavery is that many times when a Muslim slave became free, he already had a skill set. Right? One of the biggest problems with abolition in the United States, and one of the reasons that many people fought against it, right? So you actually had racist people who were like, no, everybody gotta be a slave. But then you had some people who were like, okay, well, if we free them, what are they gonna do? We haven't empowered them in any way. We haven't given them any skills. And if we free them, what's going to happen? That wasn't a problem in Islam. And not just that, slaves could actually enter a mukatab agreement with their owner, saying that I want to buy my freedom. And they would work to pay off their whatever their price was. And then they would yeah. I'm sorry? Indentured servitude you can't get out of because you're not really buying your freedom. Right? Versus the mukatab system where, yeah, you're indentured, but you know exactly how much you have to pay and how much it's going to cost to get out. We'll mention this last narration, inshallah, then we'll break for salah. Ibn Abi Hatim, he narrates in his al-ilal, meaning what? Hadith students. Hidden mistakes. Ahsant, good. It was said to my father, Abu Hatim al-Razi, again, very famous scholar, is the hadith of Abu Hurairah on the Prophet ﷺ concerning swearing with a witness sound. He pondered for a moment and said, have you seen what Ad-Darawardi said? Meaning that I mentioned this to Suhail and he did not know it. I said, Suhail's forgetfulness is not enough to dismiss Rabi'ah's statement. I know you guys are probably getting lost in the chain here, but basically what's happening is that Rabi'ah, he narrates on Suhail. Okay? Rabi' narrates on Suhail. And now what is happening is that he's saying his son, Ibn Abi Hatim, he's saying Rabi' is thiqa. He's an acceptable, sound, trustworthy narrator. Is it possible a person narrates, then forgets what he narrated? But for him, he's like, what do you mean? How is it possible? Why is Suhail saying that he didn't narrate this? When Rabi' is saying that he did. So his father, he answers, he says, absolutely, it is possible. But I do not find any corroborating report for this narration. Again, right? Looking for corroboration, because this is a lone isnad. A number of narrators narrate on Suhail, none of them narrating this hadith. Do you see what happened? So Suhail, he has all of these students. One of his students is Rabi'. And Rabi' is the only one who is narrating this narration. And he's thiqa. He's a trustworthy, acceptable, reliable narrator. I said, but do you not accept ahad narrations? Don't you accept these lone singular narrations? He says what? Absolutely. Ajal, I do. But I do not know of any similar report from Abu Hurairah concerning this issue. Remember we talked about topic and chapter and all these things. So not only were they familiar with the Prophet ﷺ, but they're also familiar with the hadith of who? Of the companions. Like, no, that doesn't sound like Abu Hurairah's hadith. I know Abu Hurairah's hadith. This isn't from them. And this is a foundational narration. This is something that is fundamentally important. That you're telling me that it's enough for me to bring one witness and I swear by Allah, and that fulfills the condition? He's saying this is something that you would see all the time in the courts, if this was the case, if this was something that was meant to be accepted. And he said that no one corroborates this with Rabi'. Rabi' is the only one to narrate this. So most likely, what is Abu Hatim basically saying?
We have to read this.
Rabi' has made a mistake. That's what he's fundamentally saying, is that Rabi' has made a mistake here. Imam al-Tabari, he narrates concerning the sunan of wudu of a hadith he himself sees to be sound. He says, this hadith to me is sound, it's acceptable. But then he goes on to say, he said, this should be weak for other scholars for two reasons. He said, so there are other scholars who say this hadith is weak, and these are the two reasons they say it's weak. And look at them. That this is the only sound narration on the subject. Does it sound familiar? And it is a lone narration, and if it is a lone narration, this requires extra verification. And he says, secondly, most are not familiar with this. What is this? It's a red flag because this has to do with this is something that if people aren't familiar with it, and this is something concerning purity, and if it were sound, it is not possible so many people would be unaware of something during wudu. The purpose here isn't to talk about why Imam al-Tabari sees the hadith to sahih. The purpose here is to show that this is actually a means of determining and deciding if a hadith is sound or not. Next section, inshallah, we'll talk about next week is precision and how that plays a role in lone reports. The Tazkiyah class, inshallah, will be after Salat al-Isha. Salat al-Isha is in about 9 minutes or so. But I guess we'll stop here. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqi nabiyina Muhammad.